what are we doing fighting in Vietnam if you cannot freely express yourself in the streets of Chicago?
Anybody who believes that these characters are interested in the democratic process is deluding himself.
You tell Buckley to come out here. He might be very interested to see how his beloved police are behaving.
How was that?
Mr. Vidal, wasn't it a provocative act to try to raise the Viet Cong flag in the park in the film we just saw? Raising a Nazi flag in World War II would have had similar consequences.
I assume that the point of the American democracy is you can express any point of view you want. Shut up a minute.
No, I won't.
And
some people were pro-Nazi, and the answer is that they were well treated by people who ostracized them, and I'm for ostracizing people who egg on other people to shoot American Marines and American soldiers. No, you don't
as
care.
far as I'm concerned, the only sort of
identification.
pro-crypto-Nazi I can think of is yourself.
Now listen, you
The right of
stop
assembly
calling me
here.
a crypto-Nazi.
Let's stop
or I'll
calling
slap
names
you in
and
your
let's get-
goddamn face, and
let's-
you'll stay plastered.
Gentlemen, let's...
Thanks for your support and thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more content. The clips you just saw were both filmed on the third night of the 1968 Democratic National Convention. The videos that show the protests and brutality outside the convention are iconic, and the DNC protests and the Battle of Michigan Avenue had major implications for political discourse in the United States from that point forward. However, what this video is about is the other clip of the two political intellectuals debating each other inside the Democratic National Convention. This event is not nearly as well known, but has been gaining familiarity since the release of the 2015 documentary, Best of Enemies, from Robert Gordon and Morgan Neville. This is an awesome film that provides unparalleled insight into these legendary televised debates, but for me, falls short in fully describing this event as the very beginning of a long, gradual downfall in ethical, trustworthy mass media journalism, and it continues to this day. Make no mistake, in the United States today, national television journalism is a mess compared to previous time periods and compared to just about any other first world country. While there are brave journalists, brave broadcasters, and amazing current affairs platforms that do incredible work, the mainstream TV news or headline news media is essentially a space where many of the least trusted news sources are the ones that have the largest audience. This is because there are two basic sins in political journalism: sensationalism and bias, and they are both key in attracting a large American news audience, which in turn attracts advertising dollars and forces an ethics race to the bottom among TV news outlets. This phenomenon is even more drastic for those outlets trying to get a piece of the current right-wing, rage-filled conspiracy news audience, originally popularized by Fox News and AM conservative radio. The end result is a misinformed, divisive electorate and some very rich TV executives. And it hasn't always been this way. In fact, when broadcast television first became mainstream after World War II, the news was properly regulated by the newly created FCC via the Fairness Doctrine, eloquently explained by cable news anchor Will McAvoy.
In the infancy of mass communication, the Columbus and Magellan of broadcast journalism, William Paley and David Sarnoff, went down to Washington to cut a deal with Congress. Congress would allow the fledgling networks free use of taxpayer-owned airwaves in exchange for one public service. That public service would be 1 hour of airtime set aside every night for informational broadcasting, or what we now call the evening news.
In the 1950s and 1960s, broadcast news was a public service from the networks.
I'm David Brinkley, NBC News, Washington.
And this is NBC News, the Huntley-Brinkley Report, assembled for television every weekday night by the world's largest and most comprehensive broadcast news organization, the News Department of the National Broadcasting Company.
In fact, it didn't make a profit, and it wasn't expected to. so there was little conflict of interest in delivering the two basic tenets of the fairness doctrine. For this reason, sensationalism and bias were at an all-time low. It sounds strange to say today, but when broadcast TV was launched, broadcast news actually ushered in a period of honest reporting that America has not experienced before or since. So how did we go from responsible, trustworthy TV journalism then
Cuba took a few more steps toward a return to normal today
to a news-for-profit model that capitalizes on rage and divisiveness today?
We need to kill them. We need to kill them. You're in danger. I'm in danger. We're at war.
Well, like most things, it happened gradually. And then sometimes, suddenly. There are several examples from the past 75 years of news organizations taking steps away from ethical, responsible journalism towards a more audience-focused, profit-driven product, and in the process, setting a negative precedent for all the other news organizations to follow if they want to keep up. For example, in 1980, Ted Turner launched CNN, a 24-hour news network specifically designed to make a profit. And in 1987, the fairness doctrine was repealed by Reagan's FCC, paving the way for the rise of conservative radio in the 90s.
If any race of people should not have guilt about slavery, it's Caucasians.
Today, we're going to look at one of the earliest and most influential events in the demise of responsible political journalism and analyze how this event led to the divisive news media apparatus we have today. And that event is the fascinating, televised, first-of-its-kind debate between Gore Vidal and William F. Buckley Jr. One of the reasons legendary newscasters like David Brinkley and Walter Cronkite were able to be so straightforward and stoic in their news broadcasts of the 50s and the 60s was because they were practically the only game in town. ABC News, the other national broadcaster, was a distant third in the share of evening news viewership and overall viewership for that matter. In the golden age of television, ABC News was really terrible. That all changed after the 1968 National Party Conventions. In those days, news stations covered party conventions from gavel to gavel, beginning to end. And the TV ratings would be really fantastic for NBC and CBS and absolutely god-awful for ABC, like embarrassingly bad. And in 1968, ABC News was so cash poor, they didn't even have the budget to cover the entire convention. So out of necessity, ABC aired its regular TV programming in the afternoon and evening instead of the convention, and then broadcast a 90-minute convention summary from 9:30 to 11 p.m. each night. Part of this summary programming included a live political debate between two well-known commentators, one representing the left wing and the other representing the right wing of the political spectrum, supposedly. This had never been done on the news, as this was massive amounts of time given to straight commentary, flat-out opinion, and political sensationalism, as these weren't just any partisan commentators.
America's most eloquent and most decided commentators have joined us this year. They are Gore Vidal, a former Democratic candidate for Congress, but better known as an author of, among many other things, a play about a political convention, and William F. Buckley Jr., a former conservative candidate for the mayor of New York, but better known as a columnist, commentator, and editor of the National Review.
Gore Vidal and William F. Buckley Jr. hated each other well before they faced off in the most contentious and sensational political commentary to air under the banner of evening news. Buckley is really the father or grandfather of the conservative movement that really took off in the 80s under Ronald Reagan and continues to this day. He was, as his brother called him, a conservative, right-wing, libertarian, Christian in a time when being too right-wing was still risky due to the lasting impression of World War II. He was the founder and editor of the National Review magazine and host of Firing Line, a program that aired on PBS, where he perfected his debate skills against various liberals. ABC approached him first about debating someone during the party conventions, and the only specific person he said he would not appear with on TV was Gore Vidal. By 1968, Vidal was one of America's most prominent authors, screenwriters, columnists, and social commentators. He enjoyed poking fun at William F. Buckley on programs such as The Tonight Show, knowing exactly what to say to get under Buckley's skin. Buckley disagreed with Vidal on pretty much everything, but there were two characteristics of Gore Vidal that drove Buckley insane. One was Vidal's sexualized writing that promoted homosexuality in the entire spectrum of what we now call LGBTQ+ as a lifestyle that should be accepted, celebrated, and explored. And two was Vidal's masterful use of the English language to equate any opinion he deemed too far right-wing to fascism and Nazism. For Vidal and Buckley, this was war. Other than being on separate poles of the political spectrum and disagreeing on pretty much everything, both men actually had a lot in common. Both were born into wealthy, important families, both well-traveled, both ran for high public office and lost, and both were wizards with words. When you first hear them speak, you may swear that they have a British accent, but they don't. It's just a hyper-articulate American accent. Think Frasier in the 90s.
You are that other one.
Yes, well, I'm the one that invited her, so that makes you that other one.
That's absolutely ridiculous.
It's
you
not
know
ridiculous.
the depths of your heart.
I knew
no
you were
foundation.
So the debates were set for all 4 nights of the Republican convention, followed by a 2-week break, and then each of the 4 nights of the Democratic National Convention. Debate 1 started off polite enough.
As a conservative, I am very much fetched by the programs of Mr. Reagan and also of Mr. Nixon.
I think we're living in revolutionary times in which new programs are needed, and that you're going to need somebody who can really, the young people in the country, the Negroes, the ghettos, the poor, are angry, restless. This is a terrible time.
But quickly, Buckley made a condescending note about Vidal's most recent best-selling novel, a novel about a trans woman waging her own personal war on societal gender norms, often violently.
It seems to me that the earlier focus of Mr. Vidal here, the author of Myra Breckinridge is well acquainted with the imperatives of human greed.
Well, I would like to say, Bill, if I may say, Bill...
Vidal was ready for it and retorted with a comment he knew would make Buckley livid, saying his character of Myra Breckinridge was entirely based on William F. Buckley.
What dominates him?
Before you go any further, I would like to say that if there were a contest for Mr. Myra Breckinridge, you would unquestionably win it. I based her entire style polemically upon you, passionate and irrelevant.
This was Gore Vidal's secret weapon for getting under Buckley's skin that he had utilized in prior years, though never to Buckley's face, mockingly dropping hints that he believed Buckley was secretly gay. And it must have driven Buckley nuts because Buckley was the lone hard right-wing intellectual, and compared to others on the far right like Nixon or Reagan, Buckley was a very effeminate man. So Vidal almost childishly used that against him.
And you certainly must, Bill, maintain your reputation as being the Marie Antoinette of the right wing. In a very moving piece called A Blow for Peace, in that magazine I will not mention, on the 29th of December 1964.
We know that you like nothing to sully your lips.
No, you came out. You will eat it first.
And although Buckley was probably the more talented debater, it was Vidal who was more prepared for the debates during the Republican convention.
Since you're in favor of the invasion of Cuba, since you're in favor of bombing the nuclear potentiality of China, since you're in favor of nuclear bombing of North Vietnam...
I've never advocated the nuclear bombing of North Vietnam.
You have, and I'll give you time and place if it pleases you.
Well, you won't.
I will.
Because I know it.
Don't duck away from the record. You said we should enforce the Monroe Doctrine and invade Cuba, the sooner the better, in your little magazine whose name will not pass my lips, April 1965. You favored bombing Red China's nuclear production facilities the 17th of September 1965 in Life magazine. And you suggested the atom bombing of the north of Vietnam in your little magazine, which I do not read, but I'm told about, the 23rd of February 1968.
Mr. Vidal, who boasts of not reading something which he is prepared to misquote in the presence of the person who edits it.
Now, Bill Buckley, if the quotation is exact...
We know that your tendency is to be feline, Mr. Vidal, but just relax for a moment and take it very simply on this. I have not advocated, I'm not horrified at the prospect
Well, I just quoted who said these things and where. Now, are you saying you didn't say
I am
them?
saying that I didn't say
Oh, you've taken them back.
that your misquotation...
Tune in this time tomorrow night, and we will have further evidence of Bill Buckley, cold warrior turned hot.
That's right, and about the human greed of everybody in the world except yourself. And then tomorrow...
There are saints.
Tomorrow I'll tell you what Mr. Vidal thinks about the Kennedys.
Good night, and let me tell you...
Excuse me, gentlemen. It's been very enjoyable hearing you articulate two...
This debate may seem tame by today's standards, but in 1968 it was revolutionary for all the wrong reasons.
That if you play this sort of a game, you can say, look, I don't think it's right to present Mr. Gore Vidal as a political commentator of any consequence, since he is nothing more than a literary producer of a perverted Hollywood-minded prose. Now,
Bill,
I think this time around, for the very simple reason that I think ABC has the authority to invite... I'm almost through.
No, you're not, in every sense.
Let Mr. Buckley finish.
I think that the people of California have the right, when they speak overwhelmingly, to project somebody into national politics, even if he did commit the sin of having acted in movies that were not written by Mr. Vidal.
How about Mr. Vidal's answer?
Well, as usual, Mr. Buckley, with his enormous and thrilling charm, manages to get away from the issue toward the comedy. He's always to the right, I think, and almost always in the wrong. And you certainly must, Bill, maintain your reputation as being the Marie Antoinette to the right wing, and continually imposing your own rather bloodthirsty neuroses on a political campaign.
Things about his character.
By the end of the Republican National Convention, it was clear that the ABC strategy had worked wonders for the struggling network in terms of viewership. For the first time, ABC's convention ratings were equal to and even surpassed CBS and NBC. However, culturally, these debates were the very beginning of the TV news' long, gradual descent into profit-driven sensationalism.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Network News Hour with Howard Beale.
I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
The audience didn't tune into Gore Vidal and William F. Buckley because they trusted them more than Cronkite or Brinkley or a young Dan Rather. They watched these two because it was entertaining, and it was simple. Right versus left. Right versus left. Right versus left. Never getting bogged down with the complicated minutiae of political issues. Never asking if it was journalistically responsible to give so much national airtime on the national news to two men that represented the extremes of the left and the right and exhibited real hatred for each other. Instead, ABC News had created a method for political theater that could be duplicated over and over again. Jon Stewart famously called out this sham in 2004.
You're doing theater when you should be doing debate, which would be great.
No, it's not
honest. What you do is not honest. What you do is partisan hackery.
Neither of these men had much of anything to do with any of the presidential campaigns, nor did they work for ABC News. What Vidal, Buckley, and ABC News really pioneered here was the dystopian future of the national news that we are living in, being told through commentators and the dreaded political pundit. This was not a political discussion show like Buckley's own conservative talk show, Firing Line on PBS, or a late-night commentary program or anything else. This was the news, the public service the networks provided to sustain an informed electorate. The public didn't learn anything from these debates, but instead gained a false understanding of how different the two sides of the political spectrum really are. That the other side didn't just have a different opinion, but instead was morally bankrupt and insidiously trying to destroy this country. And it was only going to get worse, as both Vidal and Buckley headed off to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, unaware that a whole bunch of gasoline was about to be thrown on their fire. The 1968 Democratic National Convention is one of the most infamous political events of any kind in U.S. history. By the time Gore Vidal and William F. Buckley arrived at the fly-infested International Amphitheater in Chicago, Illinois, the SDS and the Yippies were already protesting in the park, with Mayor Daley and the police threatening. It's in this tense scene that Vidal and Buckley continued their debates. This time, it was Buckley who was on the offensive and well prepared.
If you think that we are not in a position to damage the Soviet Union, you know less about international politics than even I supposed. I reveal a concrete proposal to that end, contained in a letter sent to me by Senator Kennedy.
Buckley comes prepared with a letter from the late Robert Kennedy, a second cousin to Gore Vidal by marriage. Before his death, RFK had come to loathe Vidal. Buckley knew bringing in a little family drama into the debate would get under Vidal's skin.
A letter sent to me by Senator Kennedy about 6 months ago, the PS of which was, I have changed my platform for 1968 from let's give blood to the Viet Cong to let's give Gore Vidal to the Viet Cong.
May I see that, really?
I think, however, that would be immoderate. In any case, I do share Mr. Kennedy's notion that Mr. Vidal's idea of how to prosecute the whole situation out there, quite apart from the fact of a congruence of general policy, is marred by his sort of strange fantasies concerning the realisms of politics.
I must say, I'm looking at this. What a very curious handwriting. It all sort of slants up. A sign of a manic depressive.
Vidal responds by pointing out Buckley's right-wing preference for war over diplomacy.
Here he sits, take a good look at the leading warmonger in the United States. Bill, don't you point your tongue at me now. Keep it in your cheek where it belongs.
But it was the third night of the Democratic Convention that will be remembered most, as the event rolled out under the shadow of intense protests and police brutality, in what would end up being called the Battle of Michigan Avenue. Vidal and Buckley were both on edge, just as everyone was inside the convention.
You take your hands off of me unless you plan to arrest me. Wait a minute. Wait a minute.
And each took to their corners in the culture war and the very real battle that raged on in real time.
It's like living under a Soviet regime here. The guards, the soldiers, the agents provocateur on the parts of the police. You've seen the roughing up.
If we could all work up an equal sweat, and if you all would be obliging enough to have your cameras handy, every time a politician commits demagogy or passes along a graft for bribes, or every time a businessman cheats on his taxes, or every time a labor union beats up people who refuse to join his unions, then maybe we could work up some kind of impartiality and resentment.
These people came here with no desire other that anybody's ever been able to prove than to hold peaceful demonstrations.
I can prove it.
How can you prove it?
Very easily, by citing the recorded words of Mr. Hayden of the SDS, of Mr. Rennie Davis of the Coordinating Committee, whose object has been to, quote, break down the false and deceptive institutions of bourgeois democracy sufficient to set in a revolutionary order. Anybody who believes that these characters are interested in the democratic process is deluding himself. I say it is remarkable that there was as much restraint shown as was shown, for instance, last night by cops who were out there for 17 hours without inflicting a single wound on a single person, even though that kind of disgusting stuff was being thrown at them and at all of American society.
They came here for free assembly. They came here to demonstrate against the Vietnam War, which you happen to love. I'm sorry for that. They have not been allowed to hold a meeting in Soldier Field, which they should have had, could have had, would have had a peaceful demonstration. Instead, the police, fired by Mayor Daley and by a lot of jingoes around here, have been roughing up everybody from the press to the delegates to the kids out there, and you are to sit here by and talk about order.
The agitation of both debaters was palpable, as it reached a peak that will never be forgotten. Vidal antagonizes Buckley, calling him a crypto-Nazi, which causes Buckley to lose his composure and use a gay slur on television, calling Vidal a queer and threatening him with physical harm. Let's watch it play out.
Mr. Vidal, wasn't it a provocative act to try to raise the Viet Cong flag in the park in the film we just saw? Wouldn't that invite raising a Nazi flag in World War II would have had similar consequences?
I assume that the point of the American democracy is you can express any point of view you want. Shut up a minute.
No, I won't.
And
some people were pro-Nazi, and the answer is that they were well treated by people who ostracized them, and I'm for ostracizing people who egg on other people to shoot American Marines and American soldiers. I know you don't care.
As far as I'm concerned, the only sort of pro-crypto-Nazi I can think of is yourself. Failing that, I would only say that we can't have...
Now listen, you
the right of assembly.
Stop calling me a crypto-Nazi.
Let's stop calling names.
You in your goddamn face, and you'll stay plastered.
Gentlemen, let's...
Bill.
Let the author of Myron Breckenridge go back to his pornography and stop making any allusions of Nazism to somebody who was in the infantry in the last war.
You were not in the infantry, as a matter of fact. You didn't fight in the infantry. You were not. Now you're distorting your own military record.
ABC moderator Howard K. Smith's hesitant closing remarks sum up the shock of the ABC News audience.
I think we've run out of time, and I thank you very much for the discussion. There was a little more heat and a little less light than usual, but it was still very worth hearing.
It's for this reason that Vidal was seen as the winner of this debate, and William F. Buckley went on to express the shame and embarrassment he felt from losing his temper and using the 1968 slur on national television. The documentary Best of Enemies does a fantastic job covering the aftermath of this event for Buckley and Vidal. For our purposes, however, we will look at the much more significant consequences of these debates. This petty and entertaining war of words served as an example of how to sensationalize political news by using commentators instead of journalists. In the following year, public affairs programs such as Argonsky and Company and others launched the format that would take over the news media industry. Author Eric Alterman calls this format the pundit sitcom. Alterman says, the idea was that instead of merely relaying information, each pundit would portray himself as a stock character, thereby giving viewers a chance to identify, either positively or negatively, with an entertainment personality, rather than just a boring journalist. As television diversified in the 70s and more options became available, networks in need of revenue began booking these pundits on the evening news to offer simple and entertaining takes on complicated issues. This type of program resonated with viewers so much more than news broadcasts that covered the boring details of government. And because these commentators were free agents and not news journalists, they had a lot more leniency to offer not just opinion, but opinion backed by very little facts. Many news pundits became TV celebrities themselves, the first major celebrity pundit being a young conservative named George Will.
The camera is, I think, an inherently superficial news-gathering instrument and has particular trouble with economic news because you cannot take a picture of the law of supply and demand, for example.
And this is the legacy of the Vidal-Buckley ABC News debates, a framework for sensationalizing political journalism in order to bring in more viewers and more ad revenue. And this framework was copied over and over again, while taken to even worse extremes by right-wing propagandists.
On January 6, 2021, a large group of people who care passionately about the American Constitution arrived at the U.S. Capitol building.
In the wake of William F. Buckley's death in 2008, Gore Vidal wrote a scathing column with a warning that no society so marinated in falsity can survive in a real world. As for Buckley, Vidal held hate in his heart for all these years, writing, R.I.P. WFB, in hell.
Almost. There are a few provisos, a couple of quid pro quo. Master, there are a few addendas, some quid pro quo.
That the 40-year-old or the 45-year-old group.
I mean, no one's gonna... Just do it, babe.
Yeah. Is that a last lap?
She's a Havanese. Gracie! Happy Pride, Gracie!